I finally finished this year's release, Black Myth Wukong, and I just gotta say, it's an incredible game. It's probably my second favorite game of the year so far, and it's just absolutely incredible. I'm super happy to see it gets all the love. It absolutely deserves it. It has an incredible combat system, a wonderful world to immerse yourself into, and a genuinely very interesting and captivating story. Seriously, the lore and story in this game goes so hard. Maybe if you're unfamiliar with the game, you're wondering, why are you not ranking all the bosses from Wukong? And the issue is, depending on your definition of a boss, there are around 100 bosses in Black Myth Wukong. And to be honest, there are quite a few very mediocre or only decent bosses, and I'm not really interested in making a video where I talk about mediocre bosses for like 20 minutes. I want to emphasize that this game has a fantastic boss roster, and even mediocre and decent bosses in a massive quantity and with a solid consistency can add a lot to the game. But I don't really have too much to say about some of the specific bosses. I don't want to be like, yeah, this boss is decent and it's kind of fun because the combat system is fun, but the boss itself is nothing special. It just doesn't seem too interesting to me. However, I think this game has some of the highest heists I've seen in any game ever, and I especially want to talk about these. Before I get into my favorite bosses though, I first want to talk about the honorable mentions. Starting off the honorable mentions, I want to talk about the great bosses from chapter 1. As I decided to make a top 15 list, it was quite cramped and sadly no chapter 1 boss made it in, but I still want to mention these because these hooked me on the game. Wandering Right, possibly the second boss you face in the game, and the evolution version of him, Elder Jinchi, both having a surprisingly complex moveset for early game, and Elder Jinchi having great story and some very cool memorable mechanics. And of course, the big bad from chapter 1, the Black Wind King or the Black Bear Guai. Genuinely a fantastic fight with a very memorable music, and I really enjoyed it. Sadly, it just couldn't hold up with the other bosses. Next on my honorable mentions list is the Violet Spider, and I'm going to put in a chapter that allows you to skip the segment, because if you have arachnophobia, this boss might genuinely be too much for you. It's the best animated spider I've ever seen in a game, period, and that's also one of my favorites. So you have been warned. I'm going to remove the blurry filter now. If you're still here, Violet Spider is a super great and interesting character from my favorite chapter in the game, chapter 4. It's, as I already mentioned, wonderfully animated and just a blast to fight. Some very cool attacks, just a very memorable fight, and honestly the first thing that hooked me on the game when I first saw it in the trailer. Next boss I want to shout out is the Bishui Beast. It's just a very fun fight, and it even has a special arena gimmick that allows you to switch its elements, which I sadly didn't do because I didn't know about it, but I'm still glad it's there. And the last boss I want to shout out in my honorable mentions are the 3 gang fights in chapter 5. The 2 rolling heads, fast as wind and quick as fire, are not really challenging, and there are definitely some flaws, but it's such a creative and cool fight, so it's very memorable. Misty Cloud and Cloudy Mist, which is quite a goofy name, but a pretty fun fight, and their interactions are also quite funny and memorable. Definitely enjoyed it. And the best fight, with probably the worst boss name I've ever heard, Top Takes Bottom, Bottom Takes Top, which is probably just very poorly lost in translation, being a wonderful gang. The way they change the roles very dynamically with some super attacks, it's amazing. Definitely one of my favorite gangs. But yeah, with that said, let's get into the proper list now. Starting off the list with the number 15, the Emerald Arm Mantis. I wasn't sure who to include as the last boss on this list, but I decided to go with the Mantis. In chapter 6 you have to look for Wukong's artifacts, and you have to fight some very mixed bosses. There is the Rhino boss, who is quite decent, but the Deer and especially the General are pretty terrible. And in general, chapter 6 has overall a very weak boss roster besides the highlights, which are some of the best bosses ever, but that's besides the point. But Mantis is a standout. While looking for a piece of Wukong's armor, Bajie, the best character in the game by the way, which we will talk about a lot more soon, finds this little tiny mantis. And as he leans in to investigate it, this mantis leaps into him and does internal damage to him. Bajie shrinks us and we have to enter his body and defeat the mantis inside. This is a super bizarre and memorable setting, and that's probably one of the coolest things about the boss. Besides that, the boss also has a pretty good moveset. It's quite limited, but it's very satisfying to dodge and it looks cool. It's overall a pretty great boss, but definitely not some of Wukong's best. Number 14, Tiger Vanguard. Not to confuse with the other Tiger Vanguard. Yeah, this name is pretty confusing, but the lore is pretty good, so I can forgive it. This boss was the moment where the game truly clicked for me, where it really hooked me. Chapter 1 was pretty good, but the start of chapter 2 felt rather slow and not that fun for me, but ever since I fought this boss, it was pretty much amazing till the end. And I think this boss played a big part in it. The setting in this pool of blood was really cool, his personality seemed super interesting, and the most important part was, of course, the moveset. Wukong has a fantastic combat, which we'll talk about more soon, but in this boss fight it just felt really good to use. He has some very cool, quick and delayed slashes. He can use rock solid on you, which is the ability you unlock after defeating him. It's really fun to use, and he has some other very cool attacks. This fight overall just feels very good to play. It's not one of the best bosses ever made, but it's just super fun to play, and I'm always looking forward to replay it. This boss was also surprisingly challenging and definitely took me a few tries. Overall, Wukong is definitely a challenging game, but I defeated most bosses rather easily. But this boss definitely put up a fight, so I'm also very grateful for that. I think Tiger Vanguard is just a great boss overall. Number 13, the Scorpion Lord. This guy is a funny character with a funny introduction, a pretty cool lore, and even a pretty cool conclusion at the final boss of the secluded part of this chapter. But the main reason why I love this boss is for the challenge and the fight. Yeah, this fight is pretty challenging and his damage is just super punishing. You can die very quickly here. However, I can't say I got frustrated because this fight is just thrilling. He is so fast, he has so many great extensions as the fight goes on, and later he seemingly just strings all attacks together. Perfect dodging them feels so good. I love the scorpion tail flashing up before he attacks. Just a super fun fight to learn, and I'm far from mastering it, but beating him already was a very fulfilling experience. Great fight, super fun, one of my favorites in the game mechanically. Well, what else is there to say? I don't think I can put this off any longer. I need to talk about the soundtrack in Black Myth Wukong. I think the soundtrack overall is good. There are a lot of standout soundtracks I will mention later when we get to it, and overall, the final chapter animations all have beautiful music, and some of the ambient music was also really good. Sadly, some of the mini-boss soundtracks really aren't great, and a lot of them aren't really very memorable, but there is this one soundtrack you will definitely not forget, mischievous as ever. Yeah, this soundtrack plays at so many boss fights and I don't like it. It's not a great soundtrack in my opinion. It's pretty annoying and it's especially overused. But that aside, Scorpion Lord is a pretty cool fight, and him having a pretty mess soundtrack is definitely not ruining him. Number 12, Zubagie, aka Pigman, aka the GOAT, aka the best character in the game. He's just fun to be around at every opportunity you get, and I really value every time he is on screen. He is so fun. He gets introduced in chapter 3 after a pretty great boss who we will talk about very shortly, and it's just a joy to witness at every opportunity he shines, which is pretty much every time he's on screen. He originates from the Journey to the West novels and is a very important character there, if I'm not mistaken, but he's also very important in this game. His story is genuinely very emotional, especially the chapter 4 animation hammered that point home very well. Zubagie is a fantastic character. Just being a fantastic character makes me put him on this list. He's just so fun at every interaction. So why do you fight your companion in the game? Basically, in chapter 4, Zubagie gets mind controlled by the second sister, the spider lady from chapter 4, and later you have to fight him. First you have to fight him in the introduction fight, where you just basically beat him up. This fight was very easy and just forgettable, so I'm basically skipping over it. And after that you have to face him properly. And this fight was just super memorable. There is this mud mechanic that kinda impacts how you move in this fight, and a lot of people don't like it, which is understandable, but I think it works pretty well with the moveset and no issues from me. And his moveset is overall really fun to engage with. He has some very cool attacks to dodge in his base form, and then he has his boar form, which is also fun to avoid, and some very cool scripted attacks like the Ride of the Rhinos. He also turns into a mudfish, so there is a lot of variety in this fight. This fight is not super difficult, but it's super memorable. I enjoyed this fight a lot, and I think this character and this entire fight was just super cool. Number 11, Yellow Bro. So, Yellow Bro, probably the single most unique boss fight in the entire game. Let's just start with him being a great character. He is super interesting, and once again his story was very engaging to me, even though I didn't really know much about the novel before playing Wukong. Have I mentioned that this game has a very captivating story yet? Definitely the most pleasant surprise while playing this game. It was very cool to follow the story and these characters. But back to Yellow Bro. After basically taking control over the new Thunderclap Temple, Yellow Bro spread out his influence over the new West, and now you have arrived to stop him. Phase 1 is a pretty standard boss. He looks cool, some of his attacks are fun to avoid, but it's nothing special. But this is just the start, because Yellow Bro in theory has 3 phases. Now granted, they all have checkpoints in between, so it's not really 3 phases back to back, but it's still a fight with 3 phases, and I'm going to count all of them. Talking about 3 phases, phase 2 you fight off the final time against the Macaque Chief. The Macaque Chief is basically this enemy who fights you twice throughout the chapter, and now you have the final confrontation after Yellow Bro pulls you into his sack. Yeah, it sounds weird, but it's actually really cool. And after defeating the Macaque Chief, you basically get turned into him, and Yellow Bro tries to bait out your bloodlust. After him shrinking you down and you smashing a bunch of terracotta soldiers to pieces, you face him off for the last time. And this fight is honestly pretty cool. It's mechanically not that interesting in my opinion, but it's a fun fight, and the best part about this fight, as you maybe realize, is the presentation. It's unbelievably creative and cool, and I can't get enough of it. The presentation alone carries this boss to pretty much high A tier. It's one of the most unique bosses I've ever seen, and it's 3 varied phases. I love the Yellow Bro encounter, it's awesome. Number 10, 100-Eyed Taoist Master. This boss concludes the best chapter in Wukong in my opinion, chapter 4. He is very important story-wise and is a great character, maybe not as great as some of the later ones, but still very important. And he also has a fantastic design. In general, the creatures and enemies in this game just look so awesome, and he's no exception. Besides that, he also has a pretty fun and challenging moveset, but the most notable part is at the end of his health bar, where he basically uses a Jujutsu Kaisen domain expansion to entrap you in it. This yellow bubble lets you move slower and also cuts your stamina down drastically, which prevents you from spamming attacks and requires very precise stamina management. Now, you can prevent this from happening and circumvent this by acquiring the Weaver's Needle from the Duskvale boss fight in a secret area from this chapter, but it's pretty hard to find, so I imagine not everyone will find it. However, should you acquire it, you can basically remove this yellow bubble and all the downsides that come with this. But I wanted to challenge myself further and defeated him without using this bubble, and I found it fun. I think it's a cool gimmick and I didn't hate it. It just forces you to play a bit more passively in this phase, which is not the best fit for this combat, but I think it's okay if it's just one encounter. Felt pretty memorable. In general, this fight felt pretty challenging and a great climax to this amazing chapter, and I remember this fight very fondly. I think it's great, and I'm very happy they decided to patch this fight, because before the patch you would awkwardly aim at his torso and a lot of your attacks would miss. But now you just go for the legs and you have no issues hitting him. So I think it's fine now. Also, if you find yourself enjoying the video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. It helps out the channel massively and I would really appreciate the support. Thank you so much. With that said, 100-Eyed Taoist Master is a great boss, and we're moving on. Number 9, the Stone Monkey. I think it might be a bit of a controversial decision to separate this part from the final boss of this game, because really it's just one experience. However, I feel like this fight is distinct enough to rank it separately, so that's why I decided to go with it. This is basically Wukong's broken shell in his kaiju form, which you will see later when you fight the hidden optional super boss, but it's a surprisingly great fight. The moveset he has is decent enough, some very fun attacks to dodge and maneuver around, but the best part about this fight is when he suddenly clones himself. This was very surprising to see, and these two work as a gang very well. In general, big kudos to Wukong. The gang fights in this game are very good and very fun. I think there is a lack of that in Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree, which is a bit sad. But that's besides the point. This fight definitely is a great setup and a great first phase before you fight the sage himself. But that fight is something we will talk about towards the end of this list, so be excited for that. Stone Monkey is just a fun boss and great build up towards an even better encounter. Number 8, Kangjin Star. Chapter 3 was the moment in the game where the bosses went from pretty decent to pretty good to genuinely great. And I think Kangjin Star was definitely my favorite boss up to that point. She has a very memorable moveset, mostly consisting of lightning projectiles and lightning AoEs, and she has a great use of these, even using them in a melee way at times. The boss reminded me a bit of Lightning Gods of Yomi from Nioh 2, and I think she's even better in that regard. Besides that, she has some cinematic super moves which mostly only require running around, but they look very cool and they're fun to dodge, so I still like them regardless. And she can turn into previously fought Kanjin Long, so it's a very fun and thrilling fight with a great flow and incredible visuals. Besides that, she has a standout soundtrack. It's very memorable and I really enjoy listening to it. Kangjin Star is definitely one of my favorite experiences on the first run, and I initially had her in S tier, but then I just thought about it and I'm not sure if I should place her there yet. I think she can easily go up there on replays though. So yeah, Kangjin Star is pretty amazing, but besides this great encounter, there is something even more important. After this boss, you get introduced to the best character and the goat I already talked about, Zhu Bajie. And as you know, I love this little guy so much. He's so fun, and specifically after his introduction, this game just became pure peak. Number 7, the Yellow Wind Sage. I mentioned that around chapter 3 the bosses started to get really good, but this was undoubtedly the best boss up to this point. Yellow Wind Sage is absolutely amazing. He's very close to S tier, but there is one issue which could be resolved in the future. First off, he's a very great character with a great lore and great significance to this chapter. He influences a lot. Second of all, there is some very cool build up and even an optional time travel plot where you can receive the Wind Tamer relic that allows you to avoid the only bad mechanic in this fight, which is my only gripe with this fight. I think his moveset is very good. Phase 1 is a slow start, but it's a pretty good way to ease you in. Phase 2 gets more intense with some very cool clone attacks and just in general a great expansion in the moveset. And from what I can tell, Phase 3 is genuinely amazing. Now, what do I mean by from what I can tell? Sadly, unless you have the Wind Tamer relic, which I didn't have, you can't really see anything because there is this massive tornado that smashes you up into the air and absolutely decimates you. And even worse, you're trapped in an invisible circle and can't get out while the boss can stand outside of it. I think this is a very bad mechanic and it definitely ruined a bit of my enjoyment. But I think on replays, when I use the Wind Tamer vessel to get rid of this, I can see this boss going even to S tier. I think he's very great. He was probably the most challenging boss up to this point, or definitely up there, and definitely took me a few tries to figure out how to beat this boss. But besides the final phase frustrations, it was a fun ride. Yellow Wind Sage is a great boss, but now we're getting into the amazing ones. Number 6, Yin Tiger. Not gonna lie, I think until the final chapters, this was probably the most fun learning experience I had in the game. There was one boss that definitely challenged me way more, but learning this one was even more fun. The Yin Tiger is your blacksmith in the hub area you unlock in chapter 3 very shortly after fighting Kangjin Star, and he's just amazing. I instantly challenged him right away and got absolutely obliterated. I thought you probably should fight him later, but I was a bit stubborn, so I decided to challenge him and I kept dying and dying, but it was so fun and I continued, and it started to click after a while because reading this guy's animations is so clean and awesome. For such a random and insignificant fight where you basically just challenge someone just for fun, he actually has pretty great presentation. His attacks look absolutely amazing and he has some of the coolest slow motion attacks I've ever seen. Dodging them feels so cinematic. In general, this fight just feels very good to play. I love hitting him mid combos and finding counters to all of his moves. He has this very brutal grab attack where he disappears and then ambushes you, which took me a few tries to figure out, but it was just very fun. His soundtrack was also weirdly calming and relaxing despite me getting obliterated, so that's also funny. Yin Tiger is just amazing. Number 5, the Yaksha King. And I guess we're going to count Red Boy as well, because really it's one encounter. The only reason why this boss is not one of the best in the game is because I think the moveset is not incredible. I just think it's good. Like, it was very fun to deal with and definitely very enjoyable, and I still give S rank to this boss, but the moveset is not the main reason. He has two phases, as I mentioned. The Red Boy phase, which mostly acts like someone with a flamethrower, some awesome flame projectiles and some cool clones. Very fun fun phase, but not very challenging. And of course the second phase, the Yaksha King phase, which has some awesome arm blade extensions, some very cool AoEs, and overall a pretty good flow. Also, this guy looks absolutely amazing. What a sick design. The issue is sometimes this phase kind of feels a bit static and not really as aggressive as I wished he was. I also feel like his moveset is maybe a bit limited. However, with that said, it's still a great fight and I really enjoyed it. What really puts this boss into S tier for me is the story. Red Boy is the son of the Bull King who was treated very harshly and unfairly and thereby tried to rebel against heaven. He disguised himself as the Bull King's daughter and tried to fool him to acquire Wukong's relic. However, after failing his plan, he had to fight the Destined One and Zubajie. After we defeat the Red Boy, he pretends to be dead. However, this is only a trick until the Bull King gives us the relic of Wukong and then he steals it. This is where he changes into the Yaksha King, which from what I understand are some oppressed and genocided people of his, and tries to fight for his freedom. However, after besting him even in this form, instead of surrendering and being a slave and a pawn to the heavens, he instead decides to end his life because he just doesn't see any sense in being just a slave. It's a very tragic story in this pretty tragic game and I feel very bad for this guy. And of course, the last thing I need to mention, this guy probably has the best or second best boss soundtrack in the game. It sounds like a straight up Naruto soundtrack and it was absolutely amazing. Very amazing boss overall. Number 4, Yellow Long. Oh my god. This boss probably killed me the most out of all bosses besides maybe Erlang, but I'm not sure. Maybe he killed me even more. This guy was an absolute menace. Before I encountered the Yellow Long, no one really challenged me this hard. Sure, Yin Tiger, Yellow Wind Sage, and the Wandering White in the early game took me a few tries, but nothing really got me stuck for longer than 10 attempts. But this guy absolutely obliterated me for nearly 2 hours. The thing about this guy's moveset is that it starts out relatively chill. You have some swipes to dodge, some very good readable animations, and perfect dodging them lets you punish him pretty well. The thing is, around like 70% of his health, he starts going insane. He has some pretty much insta dash attacks where you need to learn the timing, and he starts stringing combos together like his life depends on it. However, even this is still manageable. The hardest part is in the final phase, where he pretty much just doesn't stop. You need to hit mid combos, you need to punish him, you need to utilize your spells, and you need to be careful with your charged heavies because sometimes it's quite hard to find a window. This guy is just insanely challenging. It's safe to say he's my favorite from the Long family and his lore is also very good. I really like this guy, his music was also pretty awesome and definitely got me pumping when I finally defeated him. Probably the biggest wall I had in my run. Number 3, the Supreme Inspector. All these bosses I mentioned before have either been great or even amazing, but especially the top 3 are some of the all-timers in gaming. Starting with the Supreme Inspector. His design is absolutely badass, his head literally being replaced by a hand because he's the right hand of the Jade Emperor. Awesome stuff, very cool design. I also really enjoy that there is this teaser in chapter 4 where he can ambush you and absolutely annihilates you, so you are not strong enough to take him on there. But around chapter 6 with all of Wukong's relics, you can take him on, and he's a very good fight. I genuinely believe that if this guy did more damage, something like Cyan Long in chapter 3, this would be one of the hardest bosses in the game. However, his damage is rather low, so it was not too challenging. But moveset wise, I think this boss is still incredible. Phase 1 is kinda chill, it's nothing too extreme, nothing you haven't seen yet. Phase 2 starts getting a bit more aggressive and a lot more mobile, but it's still nothing too insane. However, phase 3, where he draws this giant circle of red fire, is where it's at. He uses his amazing one wheel for dash attacks, combos. He also has some very cool attacks, including his wings that require some precise dodges. It's overall just a blast and definitely a very worthwhile experience. I can't go super deep into the moveset yet because I only fought him like twice, but this was one of the bosses where you just know it's absolutely awesome while fighting it. It's such a good boss, I definitely want to do him no damage one time. I think mastering him will be very satisfactory. Number 2, Great Sage's Broken Shell. As amazing as the Inspector boss fight was, this boss fight is just next level. Let's first start with the story. I think the story of Wukong is a bit too long to really retell in this video, but to say that Wukong is an absolutely iconic character that shaped media and fiction all around the world for centuries would be an understatement. Absolutely incredible character. And what can I say? His story in the game Black Myth Wukong was wonderful. This game really felt like it it was about Wukong. You were slowly learning things about him in the game, about his destiny, about Erlang's secret plan, and it was just a really awesome climax. After defeating his stone monkey form, the real sage breaks through and fights you as Sun Wukong himself. Sure, it's still just a broken shell, but after acquiring back the relics from you in phase 2, regain some of Wukong's personality traits. It's absolutely amazing seeing these interactions. They tell you so much about this guy's character without even saying one word. It's so cool. So many memorable cutscenes alone in this boss fight. Absolute incredible presentation. My favorite boss soundtrack with a Celestial Symphony remix. Just great stuff. So does the fight live up to this hype? Oh hell yes. This is definitely one of my favorite bosses of all time. It's probably like in my top 10 pretty easily. Absolutely incredible moveset with so much variation. You start phase 1 with Sun Wukong's equipment before he draws all the relics out of you. So it's not that hard, but after he takes back his relics and you have to fight with your default kit you've been using through the entire game, it's so intense. He also regains so many cool iconic Wukong attacks like the clones, his somersault cloud, and so many more. There are so many mix-ups and variations. He strings attacks together like nothing. He's unpredictable and always dangerous. It's always a blast to fight him and I can't get enough. This is a very addicting fight and I can't wait to do it no damage one day. It will be insanely hard but also insanely rewarding. In general, one of the most memorable bosses of all time and definitely in my top 5 bosses of this year, in this very stacked year for gaming. Number 1. Erlang the Sacred Divinity. Who else could be the number 1 boss than Wukong's arch-rival Erlang Shen? Not only is he my favorite boss in Black Myth Wukong, he is also my 3rd favorite boss of all time and my 2nd favorite boss of this year. He's just absolutely perfect in every regard and ticks all boxes. So let's dive into this masterpiece. This is probably the hardest boss in the game, very likely, even on a casual playthrough. He took me something over 2 hours and he pummeled me to the ground. It was absolutely brutal, but it was so fun. I enjoyed learning his moveset so much, it was exhilarating. There is so much to love about this boss. There is his very intriguing story with his secret plan with Wukong to rebel against heaven, killing him and basically creating this new Wukong who can break free from the headband that controls him and finally attain real freedom. He also has all of his brothers testing you on his behalf so you can become even stronger. He also has one of my favorite boss soundtracks. In general, phase 3 is absolutely incredible, but phase 1 and phase 2 also have some very great parts. Erlang's voice actor is also super good. Holy shit, the Chinese voices in this game have been killing it, but Erlang is probably my favorite. There is so much attention to detail in this fight as well. I will link a video in the description, but basically, if you transform into any transformation in the game, Erlang will comment on it and he has multiple lines on every single one of them. It's so cool. Well, now that we talked about everything in the fight, the intriguing story, the awesome presentation, awesome soundtrack, and just overall great feel and difficulty, what about the moveset? Erlang has the best moveset I've ever seen in a boss, period. I don't think it gets better than Erlang, at least not from what I've seen. Phase 1 eases you into the fight, but it's very important to learn this lesson because he will just expand on it further. He teaches you the basics, like for example the dog attack where he sends out his dog, it's telegraphed by him barking. Such a cool thing. Auditorial telegraphs always go hard, and just learning these basic lessons in this phase is crucial because from phase 2 on it gets very intense. In this phase he starts mixing up and adding some very new complex moves. It's very hard to realize how smooth some of these attacks are. But after phase 2 you finally get to phase 3. And let's just say phase 3 is the absolute peak. He just doesn't stop attacking. You can't hit him with your heavies because he will always dodge them. So you need to create your own openings or hit him mid combos. It's super difficult and it needs a lot of time to get used to, but it's so worth it. He also loves to mix up literally any attack into any attack in phase 3. It's absolutely thrilling. And I think if you have a boss fight that you attempt for 2 hours and no 2 attempts feel like the same, you know you discovered a peak moveset. And that's what Erlang is. Absolutely exciting boss, can't wait to master him, super thrilled. But if you think this Erlang glazing is over here, you would be wrong. After defeating Erlang in his human form, you two transform into the 2 kaiju forms, the red mane lion and the stone monkey giant, and first you have to fight against the 4 heavenly kings. This just feels like a power trip or a tutorial how to get used to the controls. You absolutely annihilate these 4 kings like it's nothing. You strangle one of them with a dragon. That's so cool, man. I don't know. Absolutely loved it. And after that, you fight Erlang Shen in his colossal form. And what can I say? This fight was not very difficult because you get quite a lot of healing, but you actually can die here if you're not careful. And I think that's why you also got kind of this awesome tutorial section with the 4 heavenly kings. But yeah, if you withstand Erlang's flames, you are worthy, and then you beat him up. And this concludes Erlang's plan. After that, he will hand you over Wukong's memories, and you can finally become Wukong free of all restraints. This is an absolutely incredible fight with an incredible cinematic show afterwards, and I can't glaze it enough. I'm not saying that he is number 1 lightly, because the Great Sage is also one of the most incredible bosses I have fought, but Erlang is truly something special, and I just can't get enough of this guy. And this would conclude my top 15 bosses in Black Myth Wukong. To end this video, I just want to talk about the game in general. I think this game is absolutely incredible. I think it easily deserves Game of the Year, and I would be very happy if it won. It's so good. I would recommend this game to everyone. If you're not sure, maybe get it on sale, but I don't think you would regret it. I think it has an awesome difficulty, accessible to everyone. If you struggle, you can use some very high damage transformations and a plug of many to basically toggle down the difficulty. However, if you want to challenge yourself further, you will definitely have a decent challenge. That's very good. I think everyone can enjoy this game. Besides that, it's finally a cool game with a deep dive in Chinese lore and mythology. It's so cool finally seeing a game with this, and it's just an awesome adaptation of the Journey to the West novel. The story was also fantastic and very entertaining. I of course also need to mention the great combat in this game. It's just so satisfying and fulfilling, and you will definitely have a lot of to experiment with. It's a very thrilling experience if you ask me. With that said, a boss roster with nearly 100 bosses of course needs to have some stinkers, and I want to count them down. Mother of Flemlings is just a very annoying spammy boss with off-screen fireballs, and if you don't have the waterproof mantle for this, oh my god, I'm so sorry for you. Monk from the Sea is just a base enemy with an annoying gimmick added on top. Terrible boss. Flint Chief, what the hell is this arena? And Giant Shigandang, one of the most boring bosses I've ever seen. Like, what is this? This is so incredibly boring. And also a huge dishonorable mention to the Cloud Trading Deer, which is just a stolen boss from Elden Ring. Like, that's crazy. There of course were some disappointments, but overall the boss roster is pretty incredible, and I'm just happy this game lived up to the hype. It's so good, and I hope a lot more people will like this game in the future. And I also hope you enjoyed this video. If you agree or disagree, please be sure to leave down some comments. I love reading them and talking about my favorite games. And with the journey concluded, thank you once again so much for watching, and have a nice day. Bye!